So I've come here to Bunhill Fields, just on the edge of the City of London, to meet the amazing Iain Sinclair, because this year is the 50th anniversary of his incredibly influential book, Lud Heat, published in 1975. And it's Lud Heat that gives us the whole kind of template for what we've come to know as psychogeography, not the French intellectual situationist idea of psychogeography, but the book lays out this vision of London as a city of this kind of heady mix of mythology and folklore and history, and these sacred alignments running through the landscape of London, embedded in the landscape, and linking together sites that most people at the time weren't really thinking about very much, or weren't even maybe really aware of. And it gives them this really potent mythology. And it's an idea and a template which people have been following kind of ever since, and it's found its way into mainstream work like Alan Moore's From Hell. Uses the ideas in it very heavily to tie together that story. That becomes a Hollywood movie. We'll talk more about the significance of the book here, but for me it's like the key book about one particular vision of London. And this point here where I'm stood, I can see Iain over there, is the start of our walk today, and we're going to follow the key points in Iain's book Lud Heat today. It's an amazing, for me this is a key thing.
A very interesting group of pilgrims and seekers have gathered to tap again the spirit of London.
Who have we got with us today, Iain?
We have with us Anonymous Bosch, who's not anonymous. He goes under the name of Anthony sometimes. And Kristen, his partner, who's a high-powered academic in the Birmingham area, originally from Canada.
We have Alex Nat, a fantastic photographer who's going to be...
Topographical photographer too.
He's going to be documenting the journey today. So Iain, what's the significance of this location?
Well, the significance of Bunhill Fields is that it's the epicenter of my own attempts to imagine London, and it was where the book Lud Heat, published in 1975, had its generation. Because I used to like to sit under this fig tree alongside the original grave of William Blake, as was thought. And I realized there was a wonderful connection here between anybody who's striking off to do journeys in Britain, between John Bunyan of Pilgrim's Progress, a tinker who walked the roads of England, a real nonconformist hero, and he drowses there in his mossy grave. Daniel Defoe of Stoke Newington, who set off to travel the whole of Britain as a sort of spy and make a report, and William Blake and Catherine Blake. So between those three, I thought this is a starting point. And when I looked at Defoe's obelisk, I could see that it was aligned with another obelisk at the end of the burial ground, and beyond that, where new building now blocks it out, you could see the obelisk of St Luke's Old Street. And that was it. I started to walk this line, and the whole of London and its mysteries fell into place from that. But now, it was discovered that this is not the burial spot of William Blake. He's been put in there because he should be there, and the burial spot is a little bit further down the grass, and we should look at that, because what they've written on that is more significant perhaps than even the position.
Brilliant.
When it was discovered that they got the grave wrong, that there was sort of members of the Blake Society, and people decided they wanted something that's more crafted and arty than that. I love the old kind of crumbly quality of that. Anyway, this is the new one, but the section of poem they picked to go on it, I think, is absolutely spot on to the whole thing. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball. It will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall, which is basically what we have been trying to do all along. And strangely, the gate in the wall here was there. There was a gate at the corner of the Bunhill Fields burial ground. Yeah. A spiked gate stood there. And so this little section of Blake poem works well. I think what doesn't work well is the fact that they've eliminated Catherine Blake from the story, because this very much says William and Catherine, which it is, as well as I think something like 8 or 10 other people who it was just a pauper's grave.
Yeah.
There was nothing. The only point of it was a non-conformist grave. It wasn't part of official religion. He's outside the city walls, beyond the city gates. There he is. And I don't think you need to pursue the exact yard of ground that I mean, what's left of him, his bones have mixed with their bones. They've become part of the mulch of London, on top of what was, anyway, a plague pit, which Defoe wrote about. Journal of a Plague Year.
Iain, didn't you mention Defoe talks about plague sufferers running into Bunhill Fields to throw themselves onto...
Yes, Defoe wrote Journal of the Plague Year, which was 1665, and it was somewhat... he was inventing a new form of fictional documentary, now very contemporary, and within this he has an image of people throwing themselves into the plague pit. Yeah, they were so sick and ruined, and there's sort of a sense of apocalypse in the city. They just arrived here and flung themselves into the pit. This is not justified, I don't think, by anything historic, but it's a phenomenal image, and we're living up to it by continually kind of throwing ourselves into the myth sump of London to try and extract a new message. And this idea of winding out the golden string and turning into a ball and leading us to Heaven's Gate, related to Blake's idea. It's looking this way, because as far as Blake was concerned, Jerusalem was in London, but it starts in Lambeth, where he lived, but Albion faces his gate in the east, so Albion looks east, and the movement is to east, and that's the thing I stumbled across to do at a time when I was living in Hackney, but was thinking the light and the mystery was further down the river.
So I thought it was interesting that last year, when I was trying to trace a proposed alternative source for the Walbrook, I found the Tudor map of London, which shows a branch of the Walbrook running down past Bunhill Fields and joining the other branch just down there near Moorgate before running through the city wall. And Iain said there's I mean, this is music to my ears, there's another lost river somewhere.
Yes, it's or at least water. There's a water connection of a slightly grimmer kind at this end of the burial ground, which has always struck me as a terrific metaphor for indomitable courage and suffering and drowning. You see, across there, there's a grave that looks like a water tank, just roofed water tank. Yeah. We'll go to that. So this is the monument to Dame Mary Page, and you can read the text. In 67 months she was tapped 66 times and had taken away 240 gallons of water without ever repining at her case or ever fearing the operation. And the actual grave is made to look something like a tank full of water, so it's as if this is a strange tank of spiritual water representing the courage of the nonconformist woman. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, just physically to have that on your grave.
That's incredible.
So this is my other source of water, water as a glory.
It's a riposte idea of how would you like to be remembered.
Well, and there's a kind of curious geometric symbol that almost looks like the paths we're going to have to walk, because the cross is turned on its side, and you can look at the cross on John Bunyan's grave, and it's the cross struts are very much abbreviated. So the idea of the geometry of London being encoded into the stones is here. You know, you start to get excited as you move through.
Anthony here is capturing some images on his pinhole camera for the new edition of Lud Heat to mark this 50th anniversary, published by Swedenborg Press from Swedenborg House. So now we're going to make our way to St Luke's Church on Old Street.
This is another of these oases. This even was the original Bunhill Fields burying ground.
This is the experience of walking with Iain. I've never been to Quaker Gardens before here.
And yet nobody registers it. I was saying this is more of a secret.
Yeah, I've never been
This
there
is a
before.
Quaker burial ground and was the original Bunhill Fields burial ground, but luckily nobody knows it and it's hidden among the flats. So it's one of those fabulous London secrets, you know, a true oasis.
And this,
I think this property is still part of the Society of Friends, and people are taken in to stay there. So we're kind of cruising this wonderful liminal fringe between the official city, just there, and all the activities that happened in the non-conformist bits. You know, you could chuck out the outlaws and the renegades, the archery grounds and all the rest, but outside the London walls. And it so happens, therefore, that all the people of real value wash up here, probably in a pauper's grave shared with 12 others, but still. What a fabulous tree. You know, what an absolute ancient elder presence. And the noise, it's a bit like Arnold Circus, the acoustics of that thing, that there's a music to the older London, the kind of working parts of London. If you can find a garden, a burial ground, try not to have someone famous in it. And George Fox, founder. And of course you've got John Wesley just on the other side of Bunhill Fields.
So this is really the heartland of religious nonconformism.
Absolutely.
Now we're going to pass up the wonderful Whitecross Street Market, a historic street market now, mostly food, fancy food. We're heading towards the great obelisk of St Luke's.
This is St Luke's, Old Street. It's been completely refurbished.
Yeah, we walked up it, okay.
Now we turn into Helmet Row that runs alongside St Luke's.
That is, as ever, you can't get access.
Oh no.
I was saying that the church, the body doesn't feel right at all in terms of Hawksmoor. It's very much less powerful. It's by John James, another architect. And Hawksmoor just did this obelisk. And you stand here and you look up and that's got the absolute power that sets the whole line of energy off. And at the time of writing the book in 1975, there was no roof on the church. So the interior of the church was like a wilderness jungle. It was wonderful. It was like interior and exterior were completely interchangeable. And it was full of rough sleepers and strange anarchists and whatever, building fires. And I used to come in here, sneak in here and climb up to the clock window with Brian Catling. And it's an episode I wrote about in Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings. But now it's been reclaimed and tidied up and used for orchestral concerts, etc.
And
Of course you can't get near it anymore.
And also used for literary talks, is where I saw you and Will Self.
I did.
2004.
It's true, I'd forgotten
Yeah.
that. That was the first time I met did something with Will and met Nick Papadimitriou, the ultimate deep topographer.
So now we're going to retrace our footsteps from St Luke's, following the line of energy, the Lud Heat line of energy that Iain describes, down through, back through Bunhill Fields Cemetery, and then on to Finsbury Square, and from there to Church Spitalfields. This is a great day. So here we have John Wesley's memorial and I think, is it Wesley's house or Wesley's chapel? This is where he set off on his journeys around the country preaching.
So such a dynamic in this small area of all of these figures.
So we're now in Finsbury Square, and Iain's saying, look, up above there's the obelisk on the line. So Iain, we got lots of symbolism here, haven't we?
Yeah,
Finsbury Square.
It's the continued symbolism outside chronological time of a response to the Blake gravestone, with "I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball, and I will lead you in at heaven's gate built in Jerusalem's wall." So here we are. This is actually from the 1920s. The figure supporting the world on his head as a bulb is a kind of a literal clue that you're on the right line for this poem, which had not been put into the ground in Bunhill Fields until quite recently, but nevertheless. But more than that, the whole building here is called Triton House, and it's dedicated to Jupiter, Neptune and Mercury. And at the top, the messenger, Hermes, is actually ready for flight down the line of the desire line, or the song line of energy that represents this underground London. And what's nice is that it's not some sacred ecclesiastical special building. It's a building that just goes with the commerce of the moment, becomes an insurance company, becomes whatever strange thing it is now, in a square that itself has quite an interesting character, because it had a fantastic bookshop called Temple of the Muses. Have you heard of that? Which was a guy who'd been a pie man and decided that he inherited some theological books and a quantity of leather, and he decided he would open this temple-like book building, which was the first remaindered operation in England. But he filled it with, this is the period of Jane Austen, just every possible book that wasn't selling, he got it and knocked it out at a knockdown price and made a huge amount of money. And it was on that side of the square. And on the south side of the square, it was known as Sodomites Walk, because all of the gay cruising ground was there. Temple of the Muses bookshop, and then later this Triton House with these gods embedded into the wall to let you know the story is carrying on, and you just follow on in that direction.
So now we're walking down the line towards one of the key locations, Christ Church Spitalfields, just down there at the end of the street.
I mean, the thing was the erosion of the interzone between the city and the immigrant quarter. You know, the Whitechapel was decimated and there was no barrier, so suddenly it was colonized all the way right in, and you lost that wonderful sense, when this was a vegetable market, then there were 4 or 5 layers of people who managed to get a living out of it. You know, there are cellars underneath here, huge cellars where the vegetables were kept. Then the local shop people came in and bought early in the morning. Then later in the afternoon, people with allotments could come up and bet cheap stuff to put on the ground. And in the evening, the vagrant drinking communities who lived in this hinter zone used to cook up on fires made out of old pallets. So actually all those people were living, and the prostitutes that came in for the driver. So you had an amazing cultural, social history in one, and you take it away and you just turn it into this strange digital unreal world where elephants appear, and bronzed elephants appear out of nowhere.
So Iain, what's the role of Christchurch Spitalfields?
Christchurch Spitalfields, in a sense, I think is the most achieved architecturally of any of the Hawksmoor churches. This is when he really got it. In this one, the frontal view of it here, he's got all of the different orders of architecture in a stack. It should be chaotic, you know, you move from classic to Gothic, Egyptian, and the pyramid steeple at the top. And he's managed to keep them all astonishingly in balance. So, as well as relating to his knowledge of the past, it also feels an incredibly modern building. It's sort of sculptural in its proportions, and the way you can think between the round porthole windows and the elongated windows and the balance and the symmetry. It's one of London's great architectural achievements and puzzles. And yet the interior for so many years has been out of bounds. You know, there are times you can go to it. It's accessible. For many, many years, it's as if you couldn't go in it. So it became a sculptural object rather than a church. It was never a comfortable fit socially and culturally in an area of immigration, Huguenots, Jews, Bangladeshi, whatever's come here. It never was comfortable. It's always alien. And also the building has these empty portals. There are these slots that what gods should be put into these things. On the 1920s building, you had kitschy references to Hermes and Mercury, Jupiter, and here they're all empty. Whereas in St George in Bloomsbury, on the top of his steeple, he puts King George I, sort of a nod to hope for some royal patronage. But here there's nobody. There's sort of a golden dragon at the top and a direction of travel. So we're going to follow the pyramid, we're going to follow the trajectory, the diagonal, all the way down to St George in the east on the highway.
Now we're just passing down Brick Lane. And now we go down Whitechapel High Street. This is what I regard as classic Iain Sinclair territory.
One well-known yet unknown, is that still there? Yeah. By one unknown yet well-known. And then you could put your eye to that, yeah, and it was exactly onto the sepulchre in the church. Ah. It does give water. You drink that, life changes.
This is Altab Ali Park, and Iain's pointing the outline of the original church that was here. Yeah. Iain, is that the Whitechapel in Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings?
Yeah. This is Mary Magdalene, which was the pilgrim chapel on the road out west. And at the time of Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings, you had the outline, ghost outline of the Mary Matfall Whitechapel here, and nobody would go inside it. And all the drinkers gathered round this sepulchre, which is outside the sign of the thing. There was a pulpit on the side, which people, an open-air preacher, preached to working crowds on the street. And in that book, I had a kind of sequence in which I imagined Vincent van Gogh, when he was becoming a preacher out in Isleworth, came down to Whitechapel and gave a sermon, impromptu sermon from there, which was, completely fictional. But now that I'm doing the research on Van Gogh, I found that he did spend his evenings in Whitechapel. He used to come from Isleworth into the city to Grace Church Street, where his friend Gladwell his family had a print dealer's shop. And then he would have to go into Whitechapel and into Bethnal Green to collect school fees for the school he was teaching in Isleworth. And the one part of his life that's not documented is this night wandering in Whitechapel. But it's intimated that possibly this was the first time he'd gone with women in this part of London, and may have acquired syphilis there, which affected the rest of his life, as his brother did, and died of it a few months after him.
This lines up with the hole in the stone on the street out there.
We keep finding, you can still find the little fragments of the original walk, but there really isn't an original walk. It's just a desire line, it's a song line, responding to elements of London that seem to hang on and want to be there, want to be part of a story, and want to carry you in a particular direction down to the river. Mulberry Street, from the mulberry trees planted the Stuart period for weavers, all that, so still traces. You don't mind having that noise in the background?
I don't think we've got any choice.
I was going to say Tower House was very important to me at the time of Downriver. There's a whole chapter of a character who lives in this building, and it came to my attention by way of Jack London, who did People of the Abyss, when he goes into the East End as if it was a strange subterranean. He goes to a travel agent, Cooks, and asks them to set him up for going to the East End. And he gets some second-hand clothes, and he goes, visits doss houses, working houses, and he sleeps in here. Look at the size of the rooms. They're tiny, little cell-like rooms, 650. And the thing was, Jack London took his own photographs for the English edition. You've got a wonderful series of photographs. So I was living off the photograph of this building. And when it was completely deserted, we got permission to go in there and light it with candles. So people coming to the event came in here and then went up one tower following the candles, and there were strange lights and manifestations and ghosty things in the various rooms. Come down the other side into the cellar where we had a reading with Brian Catling and a couple of performers. And then the pub next door, which was then a pub, wonderful pub was there, which had a Polish landlord who took out the teeth of people who lived in the building here. It was vagrants, and he kept them in a bottle, on the big bottle. And it was like he was some kind of strange war criminal, because he would never go out. And so he would lower a basket out of the window on a hook and rope for a kid who'd give some money to go and shop, and put it in this basket. He'd haul it up to his room, but he never set foot outside the building. And we drank in there with medical students. But now it's an Indian restaurant. And that's where in the medical school of the hospital where John Merrick, so-called Elephant Man, had lived for some years and died. They had his skeleton in a glass cabinet in the medical school with the church out of matchsticks that he'd built standing on his hand like a pope, and his original hat. And it was feasible to go and visit the medical school, which I did when I was doing Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings. But then Michael Jackson came along and decided he'd like to buy it for his private museum, and panicked them all, and they took it in, locked it up in another room, which is not available for people to visit. I guess it's there now, unless it's been moved, I don't know. The family wanted to get the bones back and bury him. With the geometry of the walk is that we're following this diagonal across those obelisks from St Luke's Old Street down to St George in the East. Crosses a north-south one, which I've treated like a river that comes down a straight line from Hackney, down Valence Road, Cannon Street Road, all the way to St George in the East. And you've got things like the Cray twins being born just further up there on Valence Road. Behind that sign there was the great Whitechapel Mound, this huge earthwork built up into a pyramid at the time of the Civil War to repel royalists, and planted with trees, and there was a spiral walk up to the top, and from the top you had a view right down to the river and the traffic on the river, and it was taller than the London Hospital itself. The London Hospital had a wonderful archive with all maps, drawings, photographs. I used to draw on it. All of the books I did were based on things I'd seen in there. So now you're on the pull of this straight north-south until we hit this crossroads, which is rather sinister.
You're just going to go across Commercial Road.
Historic marker for me on Cannon Street Road was the house of the musician, guitarist, blues guitarist and book dealer, book scout Martin Stone. Lived there, had this astonishing collection of people who visited him, and a way of combining book dealing with an interest in cocaine. So for certain writers I won't name, he was helping them. They're all dead now, that's okay. He was keeping their addictions fed, and they would give him first editions and rare editions and manuscripts. And you'd come in here at night and there'd be all kinds of weird people. And that became really the background story and one element of Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings. Because I met Martin up in the markets around Cheshire Street and Brick Lane on a Sunday. And he said, I can show you some books if you just carry these back for me, because I think I've hurt my back. It's just around the corner. It was right down to here, these two huge sacks. That was the beginning of our relationship, but we were good friends for many years. Anyway, he's right on the track, which is one of the reasons. He was a possible replacement. Yeah, he was a replacement for the Rolling Stones. It'd be just like Brian Jones. The reality, the real story is that he was so spaced out, he didn't turn up for the audition. He was supposed to come along and play Thursday morning, but he didn't get up till 2 o'clock. So the Ratcliffe Highway is that van going down there. Yeah. This is the crossroads where they buried the murderer. Okay. Key part of the book is the episode of the Ratcliffe Highway murders written about by Thomas de Quincey on murder considered as a fine art, and the supposed murderer, John Williams, committed suicide in prison before he could be tried and hanged, and so they wanted a ritual in the area. They got a cart and had the body on this cart processing from the sites of the two murders. The whole family wiped out, and they kept the bodies in St George in St George in the East here, church. The body was processed to the crossroads here. There's a pit dug in the middle. John Williams put in it. There was a stake through his heart and his head cut off. so treated as if he was some kind of vampire, and the head supposedly went up behind the bar in the Crown and Dolphin. You can see the Crown and Dolphin pub in the original engravings of the church. The curious thing is that just on the other side of the road, the right-hand side, was the Swedish church, Eleanor Ulrika, and it was where the Swedish scientist, mystic Emanuel Swedenborg was buried. And his body was dug up at the time when there was a fashion for collecting heads. The head was cut off and disappeared. Alan Moore, in his new series of novels, The Long London, has episodes in the Crown and Dolphin pub in which all these heads remaining in bottles are the kind of mentors to the spiritual life of London, including Swedenborg. And this is one of those crossing points in the fabric of time and space where you can gain access. And the endless traffic of London rumbles over the body of the supposed vampire. But Cable Street has that other history of this is the point of resistance to Mosley and the fascists, again summoned up in Alan Moore's account. And the poet David Gascoigne, who I knew, spoke about having attended that, so it was a crossover point when people were doing things like eavesdropping for mass, reports on the life of the ordinary working people in Wigan or whatever, came over with a surrealist poetic and the resistance, left-wing resistance to Mosley and his anti-Jewish marches, all here. I used to cut the grass around the Swedish church as well as at the back of the Hawksmoor church, and we would tend to have a drink in the Crown and Dolphin at the end of the day, and by that time it was the favourite pub of the sewer men. So they emerged from the sewers just down the road there and came in this pub. So you had the reality of the sewer men still in their rubber boots and kit, and you had these supposed heads hidden away behind the bar. Some local gangsters, some mystics, and John Williams, the Ratcliffe Highway murderer. It would be great to get up the tower, but I don't think there's anybody here who can let us, because this is just a shell of the Hawksmoor church, with bomb damage, and a new church has been inset into the gap. But on May Day you can ascend the tower. They sing hymns to greet the May morning, and if you happen to be, you won't be, but you could be, if you were passing here at 6 in the morning, you can go up to the top, which I've done with Mark Atkins, and they sort of give you a breakfast.
How does it fit in with the alignment?
This is it. According to the alignment, the diagonal alignment we followed of the obelisk line. This is it. This is the end of that line, as it were. And then, it's not the end because it goes directly through to St Alfege in Greenwich. So you essentially go right the way through to Greenwich. Yeah, this is on this straight line. We're going to branch off a little further to the east to go to St Anne's Limehouse, which for me is the most significant because that was really the base when I was working as a gardener and began to think about Hawksmoor churches. Was just the chance to sit down in the garden there and talk to various folk, and occasionally to see Francis Bacon and John Deakin walking through to the bus stop, because Bacon lived in Narrow Street, couldn't work there, but he lived there and partied there with dockers, what was left of them. So the interior has no feel of Hawksmoor whatsoever. Just go in there and it's a church in another place. It's as if the story around it doesn't exist any longer.
But none of the interior is from
it's all completely redone. the victims of the highway murder were buried here somewhere, not quite sure where. I mean, Hawksmoor wanted far more pyramids and things on the roof of the church, but never got his way.
Is that because he was really bad with money?
No, it's just like, you know, standard like making a film. Everything was a struggle over the budget, and you'd get budgeted for so much, and then he would always do. The thing is, he made revisions all the time, so it was endless drafts. And some of the early drawings are extraordinary, but he always gets pulled back. He never quite gets what he wants. And ends up having to collaborate with gentlemen architects and amateur architects and, you know, play second fiddle to them and get less credit. But I think he's had the last laugh.
So we are just walking along the highway, really busy road, to St Anne's Limehouse. Looks like a little detour into St Paul's, Shadwell, our church that I know.
This is one of the opening chapters of Down River. As I was coming down here, and I heard sort of a strange music, and went in there, and there was a voodoo ceremony going on in the church, with chanting and a skull and candles and all kinds of incredible weirdness. And so it was like time slip. I thought I'd ended up in, I suppose it was a portal to what was going to happen in St Anne's Limehouse, but it had that sense of coming off the river, you know, the world ocean, because the Thames is now just over a couple of walls away. And this is the church where Captain Cook got married. St Paul, Shadwell. So we were very strongly now flavouring to the river.
This is King Edward Memorial Park. Oh, this must be one of the old tunnel entrances. Iain, is this one of the old tunnel entrances then? Was this once a foot tunnel across the Thames?
This was a foot tunnel. I've been through it. It was a rather high foot tunnel. You go down here. It's one of the excavation points for the tunnel, and you could emerge to the other side. And that was the one I went through it, and I didn't know where I was. You know, I kind of merged in this strange world. And also, it's a very important spot. Can you see just over there that sign? The painted sign with a painted boat.
Oh, yeah.
I think we may have passed here on our journey.
Yeah.
But that's the plaque to the Northwest Passage, saying that from this Frobisher set sail from these steps to discover the Northwest Passage, which becomes the metaphor for all Mackenz's journeys, De Quincey's journeys, the idea of finding a Northwest Passage across London. The kind of wanderings that take you up to Abney Park and out are all based on this idea that seems so rich of finding a Northwest Passage through. And there's the plaque to it, and we can't get to it because this is a super sewer.
Captain Cook plaque here on the side of this relatively modern red brick building. It's funny walking with Iain as you see whole new aspects of London. Like today, there's been several places in areas that I thought I knew quite well. and yet you're still going through these little areas, little pocket parks, small parks, gardens, elements of churchyards that you've been into but you've never seen that particular aspect of them. It opens up a whole new world to you.
We're in Narrow Street in Limehouse. So at the end of the street is the Hawksmoor Church.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Right.
Yeah. Where all the adventures start. Civilization ends at the waterline, as Hunter S. Thompson said. I think it begins.
Just passing through Ropemakers Fields on our way to St Anne's Limehouse, which is just up here. So we've arrived at St Anne's.
I mean, it's less sort of aesthetic than Christchurch.
What's the story with St Anne's then, Ian, in terms of the line of alignment, the pyramid?
In terms of the alignments, we followed a sort of diagonal from St Luke's near Old Street down to St George in the east. This would be a diversion from that. I think this forms into a different kind of triangulation, including Church Spitalfields, which becomes clear when you get to the top of the hill in Greenwich at the Wolfe Memorial. When you look down between the two domes of the Royal Naval College, and St Anne's Limehouse appears exactly in the middle, and if you trace that line further on, it hits Church Spitalfields. So there's a sort of series of these geometric alignments which are like magnetic currents that just pull you along. You don't have to walk, you know, you're carried forward as if on one of your underground streams or rivers. And we've slightly, I don't know if you felt it, but we were, as far as until we got to George in the east, we were being floated. And then when we walked onto the river and came down to here, we're having to put in some of the work. It's a different kind of energy. And this one for me has a different energy to, obviously a hugely different energy to St George in the east. This is monumental. This is the most Egyptian. The angles are so sharp. You know, it's a sense of something epic and conclusion. This is an end stop. You don't go any further. This is the eastern gate that we set off to find by following Blake's golden string. We're at the eastern gate of Albion. And then, you know, you go back, or either follow the Isle of Dogs down, or you take a train and take a tunnel and you come to St Alfege in Greenwich, which is a sort of a different feel, a lesser feel than the churches in Stepney.
You were working here as a parks gardener. That's the context of Lud Heat, right?
Yeah, the context of Lud Heat was I worked for the council as a gardener and was based in George's Fields, and then we would come out, you know, either by bicycle or by Land Rover and look after the grass here at St Anne's, St George, and all of the local schools. And finally I was driving tractors down to the Isle of Dogs to what is Canary Wharf and cutting grass there, and they've got meadows of the abandoned dockland. It was astonishing, you know. Spend all afternoon taking a slow tractor down the Isle of Dogs.
And you discovered these alignments from going to the...
Yeah. Well, I discovered the alignments because, in a way, as I described before, we were deciding that the cultural entities I wanted to deal with were all somehow involved in the non-conformity of Bunhill Fields. And sitting there, some friends were visiting from America and I wanted to take them for a walk, and we just started to follow the walk we've done today, and this is where it seemed to lead us. And the girl who was coming with us on that walk had just discovered she was pregnant, and she sat down, we actually could get into the church that day, sat down in the church and had a sort of epiphany, you know, of something. I don't know how I walked that distance from the state I'm in, and I can't go any further, and this is how the building is christened in a sort of way by this thing. And then by actually coming here and finding a job which landed me here, I started to connect with the churches in the terms of research. You know, I'd be coming down here in my lunch and having my sandwiches and staring at this building and trying to make sense of it. And then eventually going up onto the top at Greenwich and seeing, oh, wait a minute, this one seems to align with that one, this one seems to align with that one. And there's this really powerful energy that runs straight through Wolf's obelisk, on down over Blackheath, down in the way that we walked with Andrew Cotting, down to Battle Abbey. It carries you right out of London easily. So it's a question just of tapping into those energies. I think at the beginning of Lud Heat, I said the living can assist the imagination of the dead, and that's it. The dead, the unquiet ones, are quiet here, and they're open to giving you some dictation if you behave properly and keep your attention and your awareness, and you're prepared to drift without looking for anything beyond the story. I was like cutting the grass here and looking at it, and I see the Francis Bacon walking along here, and you go like to the bus stop just there. I thought, what? And then the next time he's doing it again, and I realised he's living down in Narrow Street in that house. So I think this church, of all of them, provided most of the narrative, the kind of idea that there was some curious theology behind it all, a kind of sense of Egypt and a sense of autopsy. That's the kind of underlying metaphor of the book, was an autopsy for landscape and for place, for what was going to happen with the wreckage of the future docklands and the development packages that were coming up. And this building was strong enough to hold its own and to move into another dimension, sort of partly by way of Peter Ackroyd and Alan Moore and so on. You know, it gave that other story global resonance.
So now we go from here, we're going to actually cheat a little bit and go on the DLR down to Island Gardens, go through the Greenwich Foot Tunnel. It's amazing, what an amazing day. So we are about to descend underground into the Greenwich Foot Tunnel.
Done by Hawksmoor.
Okay, yeah.
And there's the obelisk is exactly on this line. If you followed straight through here, it comes, St Anne's Limehouse is immediately behind you, but you can't see it now because it's wiped out by Canary Wharf. This is the point where, standing up next to General Wolfe, who introduced Freemasonry into North America, I saw that if you look between the two domes of the Royal Naval College, which Hawksmoor had worked on, you could see St Anne's exactly in the middle, and a vision that's now blocked out. And if you went beyond that, you got to Church Spitalfields, and that was the basis of the map I started to construct on scraps of paper and passed over to Graham Catling to draw out as a proper map. The Hawksmoor Church, St Alfege, is just behind the masts there. Okay, this is a necessary rite of passage to actually have the experience, and you've been talking about underground rivers, to be under a river. How unusual is that? To be actually under the monumental weight of the Thames and all of its history, strolling casually under it, and emerging for this little coda to the Hawksmoor story of a church that's never quite felt It was part of the story.
So Iain, this is the final part of the walk then?
Yeah, it is. It's the end of the Great Diagonal. And it's got a different note to it. You know, I said that St Anne's Limehouse was an end stop because it's so monumental and so absolute, whereas St Alfege was built a little bit earlier, and it comes at the end of the walk out of St Luke's obelisk. But what we've got here are these curious orphan children in stone with their faces a bit abrased and unhappy and sad. It's like a drowning in a way. The church itself doesn't look like a Hawksmoor. It's got the Hawksmoor elements, but it's more gracious, it's more accommodating to a sort of middle-class sensibility. It's got none of that power, it's got none of that necrophile, obituary sense of the other churches, which I think are about an elegy for a lost London. This is not. This is like part of a community, and it works, and it's sort of musical in its structure, and you're free to walk around the back. And having completed this walk today, what strikes me is strange. It confirms a sense of the geometry, sacred geometry of London, but what I hadn't thought of before. From the Blake grave, you get the sense of the golden ball of string being rolled out, but the straight line of it would take you, if we were going west, we would actually come up to St George in Bloomsbury, Hawksmoor Church, which is wrongly aligned. And on top of the steeple there, the stepped steeple where King George stands on the top, it's looking across the road and it's looking at Swedenborg House. So in a sense it is as if this ball of string, which has been rolled, going back west, goes as far as the Hawksmoor Church on that side, which instead of being east-west is north-south, and the stepped obelisk looking across the road, Swedenborg House. End of the story.
And what an incredible walk that was through Iain's secret history of the East End of London. And it's amazing to be ending it down here in Greenwich, coming through from Bunhill Fields out to St Luke's, back again, Christchurch, St George in the east, St Anne's Limehouse, a return to St Anne's for me. What an amazing, amazing walk. So thank you for coming along. Thanks to my wonderful supporters on Patreon and the YouTube members here. Thank you to you for coming and watching these videos and supporting the channel. As I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be.